When I asked him why he'd never told me this before, he said he was so worried I'd want to kill him for keeping the secret for so long that he waited until he was just about dead to tell me the truth. In this episode, I'll tell you all about Buddhist near enemies and apparent friends, a most unexpected deathbed confession about the first time I was on TV, and how action is what defines compassion. I'd appreciate you taking some time after you listen to subscribe, rate, and review my work on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your listen on. I'm Dr. Juko Holiday. Let's get comfortable being human together. In Buddhism, there are these wholesome emotions we cultivate as our practice grows. They're akin to the fruits of the spirit in Christianity. There are 4 of them, called the Brahmaviharas: loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Compassion, the focus of our podcast today, is a resolve to be present with suffering, both our own and that of others, in a skillful and engaged way. It is empathy in action, a vow to maintain contact with another being's humanity, even when they act from their wounds and their ignorance. Self-compassion is believing deeply in our own light, even when fear obscures our best self and we act from damaged places ourselves. It's a commitment to work toward extinguishing suffering, planting seeds to transform it into wisdom. Compassion, or karuna, is what motivates some flavors of Buddhists to make a promise to work toward the liberation of all sentient beings, called bodhisattva vows. Spiritually speaking, we go big. Until every last one of us is free, none of us are. Now, I'm an agnostic Buddhist with a pretty complex relationship with Jesus, so I'm not going to make any definitive statements about whether reincarnation and rebirth are literal or not, but in theory, bodhisattvas work our asses off to get freedom from the endless cycle of suffering, death, and rebirth, only to turn around, come back into a human body, and start over. Again and again and again, until every last sentient being is on the nirvana bus. I took bodhisattva vows in 2009, and candidly, there are times I'm not quite sure what I was thinking. Because compassion is hard. It takes a lot of work to arrive at a point where you really and sincerely want people who hurt you, who disagree with you, and who move through the world in ways that upset you to be free from suffering. I learned a lot about this from my father, who was not an easy man to love. The people in his church once gave him a plaque engraved with a verse from Proverbs. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. They may have been church folk, but they knew what was up, and they were pretty good at using scripture to insult someone. Michael L. Johnson, my adoptive father, wore matching 3-piece suits with pocket handkerchiefs that matched his tie and hats with brims that had feathers in them. He bought my mother an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme and had both of our initials pinstriped on the door handles in 1978. He was grouchy and fussy and jumped suddenly if you snuck up on him. To say he was ornery would be generous. To say he was verbally abusive would be accurate. And maybe he had a right to be so angry, like a person who swallowed poison needs to vomit it up. His life was not easy. His father drank a lot. He was drafted into the army during the Vietnam War, and he was a black man born in the United States in 1941. He was an auto worker, a member of the UAW Local 696, a tool and die maker who had a good job with benefits. He played the numbers long before Ohio made it legal in December of 1979 and called it Pick 3. He was loyal to his wife, to the people who brought him up, and to the number man who was all but put out of business by the Ohio State Lottery's Pick 3. I was terrified a lot of the time when I was little. Then, as I got older, I got angry myself. I yelled back. We fought. He snatched me once by the hood of my coat and picked me clean up off the floor, and I pissed all over myself. He whipped me with a belt, only once, because the sound of the clang of his buckle when he reached for that belt when he thought I was getting out of line was enough to cause me to just fall to pieces after that. My father never sexualized me in any way or violated my space or my body. He was so afraid of being accused of it because I was adopted that he didn't hug me in public. I had to teach him, when I say, "I love you, Daddy," you're supposed to say, "I love you" back. We never gave up on each other, and while how a lot of what unfolded between us didn't look like love, it was the best version we could do at the time. And underneath all of the conflict was a deep desire he had to save me from all the things that hurt him. He just didn't know how to go about it. He was both proud of me and mean to me. He wasn't a man who laughed a lot, but once on a visit to California, I took him to the beach and he took his shoes off and just started running. Before he could stop himself or think about it too much, he laughed, and I don't think I ever saw him that free again until the day he died. His story is not so much about the predictable things that made him hard, but the absence of things that could soften him. He wasn't just abusive to me, he was abusive to a lot of people. It would take a long time for me to understand the level of trauma and pain that he was living with, which doesn't excuse his behavior, but contextualizes it. I moved from anger to pity to empathy and genuine compassion for what it was like to be him. The closest he ever got to therapy was a family session we had while I was hospitalized for depression. And he opened a newspaper, started reading it, and stopped talking when the therapist asked him about his own past. You can't be that mean and have most people stick around. Death already has a way of scattering people who are afraid of it, even for folks who are really sweet. But he had taught me to be loyal. And he had loved me through a lot of big mistakes and rough passages I experienced as an adult. And there was no way I was going to let him die alone. One day, near the end, we were watching The Family Feud, and he said, "I never told you the truth about how your mama and I knew to go down to Cincinnati to the children's home and get you." He referred to adopting me as getting me. It was just his way. I handled this according to the custom of our family. I stayed quiet and stared and kept my eyes on Steve Harvey. He kept going. You were on TV, on the news. They showed you and a boy with braces on his legs and said you were both available for adoption. You had a big scar on your forehead and a spot where they squeezed you too hard with the tongs when you were coming out. When we called, they told us about the scar because they were afraid we wouldn't want you because of it. The boy was adopted when we got there, so they showed us you. Your mother thought you looked like a baby doll and didn't mind the scar. So that's how we got you. WKLY in Louisville, Kentucky is affiliated with an organization called Wednesday's Child, a weekly news feature that highlights older children and others considered, quote, unadoptable. The idea spread, and I have a really vague memory of seeing these segments on the news when I was growing up in Southern Ohio. Trying to research all this, all I came up with for my area were references to the Humane Society and a story about 2 teens and 100 dogs who were removed from a home in Miami County, and a random Facebook post about a lucky cat who got adopted after a weekly Pet of the Week segment on the news. I can see why it's a secret he hesitated to share. When I asked him why he never told me this before, he said he was so worried I'd want to kill him for keeping the secret for so long that he waited until he was just about dead to tell me the truth. He thought knowing about all that would make me sad, that they had originally gone down to pick up the little boy. He thought that I might have been upset to know that they believed I'd have developmental issues because of this forceps injury, but he let me know how proud he was that I surprised everyone when I turned out smart. He teared up then and told me that even though that story sounded so bad, he was so glad I was his daughter. He was so glad things worked out the way they did. And so am I. A few days later, I fell asleep stretched across the end of his bed, and when I woke up, I could tell that he was on his way home. I called Jerry. He called the hospice nurse, and I got to hold Michael L. Johnson's hand as he slipped away. However broken and damaged our love had been, it was perfect, whole, and freed both of us in the end. In Buddhism, the near enemy of a wholesome virtue is a counterfeit of what we're actually aiming for. And it's unhelpful because the genuine expression of the virtue helps free us from suffering, but the counterfeit just perpetuates it. So the near enemy of compassion is pity, which can easily masquerade as compassion and convince us we're helping when we're actually making things worse. Pity is about positioning. I'm up here and I see you down there and agree with the general conclusion that you are currently in a sad and sorry state. Pity puts another person down to lift ourselves up. Pity can lapse into using your suffering to relieve my own to make me feel better about myself. I don't care too much for sympathy either. Just follow this. It's why I call it an apparent friend to compassion. Sympathy leaves me stuck where I am, but with the benefit of holding a bag of sorries that really can't do anything for me. Authentic compassion is active. I'm not just sorry you're down there struggling. I'll risk what it takes emotionally to join in your suffering and actively seek a path out. Understanding near enemies and apparent friends of healing tools like compassion is critical because we can't get comfortable being human without bestowing these gifts on ourselves. On the path to self-compassion, if we let the near enemy and apparent friends of self-pity and self-sorrow get the best of us, we get stuck in a kind of frozen story that can loop around and around and keep us bound up for years. Compassion starts with being present with ourselves and others, hearing, seeing, holding those who suffer tight. It's choosing not to look away, but to be moved into action by the suffering we witness and to find a path to liberation. It springs from a motivation to act, to make it stop, to see that what hurts you hurts me, even if it takes a lifetime to figure out what it will take to get free. Compassion can ripen just like fruit. It can change and deepen with practice. You can get better at it. Michael L. Johnson and I certainly did. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali say, when others are at bliss, choose bliss. And when they are not, choose compassion. This is a section of my podcast where I will answer your questions and entertain your comments about this material. You can go to my anchor.fm profile page and click on the little microphone button to leave me a voice message. Being human can get confusing, so just ask Juko for insights from a fellow flawed and fabulous soul. I do a lot of things, and you can go to jukoholiday.com to find out about my yoga teacher trainings, yoga therapy training for mental health professionals, and my yoga therapist training with an emphasis on emotional wellness and entrepreneurship for social change. Those are all happening in the Santa Cruz Mountains, not too far from San Jose and the San Francisco Bay. I am elated to be on the faculty of 1440 Multiversity, and I'm leading a retreat for women of color in August of 2020. You can go to jukoholiday.com/2020 retreat to leave your email and get notified when registration opens. I am a conservationist and a Ronin Institute research scholar in the disciplines of psychology and ecology, and you can visit redwoodlove.org to find out about the Care Forest Project, which combines microconservation with human connection and allows you to offset your environmental impact and move from climate crisis overwhelm to action. Next time, we'll explore how to balance compassion and empathy for others with dignity and respect for ourselves. It's all about the boundaries, baby. Our next blessing session will be in 2 weeks' time, but be sure to subscribe to know when I publish some bonus interstitial meditations and short reflections on our journey, getting comfortable being human together. This is Dr. Juko Holiday. I am so grateful to be on this path with you. Go shine.